Okay, so the JFK assassination, right? I mean, it's like this huge event in American history. And we all want to know, like, what really happened? What's the truth? What has the government been, hiding from us? And these new documents that are coming out, they're like these little windows into the past, right? We're not trying to rehash the same old conspiracy theories here. What we're going to do is look at some really specific things from the CIA, mostly operational memos and reports, and see what we can learn, what new insights we can find about the assassination, the context and the aftermath, the whole thing.
Yeah, and even these documents that come from way before the actual assassination in November of '63, they're so interesting because they can kind of help us understand, like, what the CIA was doing back then, what information were they gathering, who are they keeping tabs on, and it all helps us get a better picture, like a more complete picture of everything surrounding this tragic event.
So let's jump in and start with a document from May 14th, 1955, way before Kennedy was assassinated. It's called Transmittal of Reports, and it's from a senior representative in New Delhi. Now, you might be thinking, wait, India? What does that have to do with JFK? And it's a good question. This memo is about something called Thesaurus Transmittal of Reports. What do you think we can get from this early document?
Well, I think it shows us how big the CIA's network was, even back then. They were gathering information all over the globe, even from places that might not seem directly connected. Thesaurus was probably a code name for some kind of project. And all these reports and notes from late '54 and early '55, well, it tells us they were definitely paying attention to something happening in that part of the world. So it makes you wonder if any of that information, even if it seemed random at the time, ended up being important later on, maybe in ways they couldn't have predicted.
Yeah. And what's interesting is the different kinds of stuff they were sending. Reports, notes, even a whole interview with someone from the USIA. That's the United States Information Agency, which was basically the government's voice to the public overseas. They even sent a notebook. Like, what does that tell us about how they were collecting information?
It shows how intelligence work is done. You have these formal reports that are kind of like analyzed and polished, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have these raw notes from interviews and people's observations, which can give you a different kind of picture. The fact that all this was being sent to the chief at the WEA, probably the Western European area, tells us that even this stuff from India was somehow connected to what was happening in Europe. Like the world of intelligence was already pretty connected back then.
There's this one detail that stood out to me. There's a mention of a guy named Grinhalt C. who asked for a copy of the report to help him put together a bigger report on, like, all their findings and impressions. It seems like they were trying to create a big picture from lots of different pieces. What do you make of that?
That's really important.
Yeah.
This master report thing, it shows that they were trying to make sense of all this information. They weren't just collecting it. They wanted to analyze it, find trends, and understand what it all meant. We don't know exactly what was in that master report, but the fact they were putting it together tells us a lot about how the intelligence community worked.
Totally. And of course, this whole thing is marked secret and returned to CIA, which definitely means it was sensitive information. Okay, let's fast forward like 13 years. April 19th, 1968, 5 years after JFK is assassinated. And we have a cable-marked Priority Night action. This was right after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. And what's so interesting is who they were looking for, urgently looking for.
Right. This cable shows how intensely focused they were on finding certain people after another huge assassination. They wanted everything on Eric Starvo Galt, alias Harvey Lohmeyer, alias John Willard. They wanted his birth date, a really detailed description, right down to a noticeably protruding left ear. Pretty intense.
And then there's the remarks section. It says, reportedly is a lone wolf, allegedly attended Bance Instruction School, has reportedly completed cock course in bartending, considered armed and extremely dangerous. I mean, lone wolf, that's the term everyone always uses to describe Lee Harvey Oswald. And the dance instruction thing, it's like, are we seeing a pattern here? Does this tell us anything about how the CIA was profiling potential threats or categorizing people?
It's a great point. This cable is about the King assassination, yeah. But it's hard not to think about Oswald when you read it. The lone wolf thing, and even these little details like the dance lessons, along with the armed and extremely dangerous warning, it all has this echo of what we know about Oswald. It makes you think, did the agency have specific types of people they were looking for based on, I don't know, certain behaviors or profiles?
For sure. And then it says, pouch photo of Galt to any addressee desiring it, and then Galt's current whereabouts unknown. So they clearly wanted to find him, and fast. And get this, On that same day, April 19th, 1968, they send another priority night action cable. This one's about James Earl Ray. Sending both of these out on the same day, that has to mean something.
Absolutely. It means they were all hands on deck to find these guys after King was assassinated. They wanted them both bad, and they were thorough. For James Earl Ray, they wanted height, weight, eye, and hair color, even specific scars, just like they did for Galt. It looks like they had a whole system for identifying and tracking people.
And they lay out Ray's whole background. U.S. Army service, discharged as inept and unable to adjust, time in a mental hospital, and a history of serious crimes. Like he had escaped from prison not long before. They even say considered armed and extremely dangerous.
So both of these cables together, what do they tell us? They show us how the CIA operated right after something big happened, like an assassination. They would send out all this detailed info to their offices everywhere, and quickly. It was a big deal, and they were using all the resources to find these guys.
Okay, let's change gears and go back in time again. This time it's February 1st, 1956. We have a field information report all about Guatemalan exile activities. This one's marked secret too, and the source they're using is described as a high-level Central American exile. Now, this is a while before 1963, but why is it relevant to our deep dive into, what the government might have been hiding about JFK?
So this report is like a snapshot of what the CIA was up to in Central America in '56. That was a few years before the Cuban Revolution and before things with Cuba got really tense during Kennedy's time. The fact that they're relying on a high-level exile, well, it tells us they had connections in these exile communities. And these networks would become super important later on when the U.S. was trying to, deal with Castro. It makes you wonder, how deep are these relationships and how did they change over time?
One thing they mention is some correspondence from January 1956 with a call Ernesto Paz Tejada. They even give his address in Costa Rica, so they were definitely in contact with these exile figures. What do you think that tells us about the agency's role in Central America at that time?
It tells us they were definitely involved. Remember, this was after the 1954 coup in Guatemala, the one the CIA backed. That coup created a lot of exiles with all kinds of agendas. By keeping in touch with these guys, the CIA could stay informed about what was going on in the region. And maybe they could even use them for, future operations, especially as things with Latin America were changing.
Okay, next we have another secret report. December 4, 1961. The title is Biographic and Operational Report on Felix Isidro Rodriguez Mendicutia, another guy with ties to the region. What can we learn about him from this document?
This report, it's a deep dive into who Felix Rodriguez was. It's got his personal history, his education, and most importantly, all about his work against Castro. It says he was connected to the Directorio Revolucionario Estudiantil, the DRE, and that he took part in actions against the Cuban government. So he was definitely involved in the CIA's anti-Castro stuff during Kennedy's presidency. When things were really heating up with Cuba, there were a lot of covert operations going on.
And the report goes into his military training and operational activities, so we know he was involved in some pretty serious stuff. Later on, they sent him to the U.S. for more training, and he kept working against Castro. So we're talking about information gathered years before JFK was assassinated. How does it all connect?
It's true that this report doesn't directly tie Rodriguez to the JFK assassination, but it does show how involved the CIA was with people like him, people deeply into covert ops and the fight against Castro. And given all the theories about Cuban exiles and the assassination, this kind of background is really helpful. It helps us see the bigger picture, the network of people and activities that were in play back then. It shows that the CIA was definitely paying attention to these exile groups, even cultivating relationships with them.
Okay, last one. A short memo from April 18th, 1960 marked Return to CIA. It mentions a rundown of something called the A case, which they were going to talk about with the British. They wanted the British to agree to a joint further development of, well, something that's redacted. But there's this handwritten note at the bottom that's super interesting.
Yeah, that note says, did not bring the A case up with the British, as the climate was not right at the time. What does that tell us? Well, first, the A case must have been pretty sensitive, right? Why else would they need the British to sign off on it? And then, why wouldn't they talk to their allies about it? It seems like something was going on between the U.S. and Britain, maybe some tension or disagreement that made it the wrong time to bring up the A case.
Exactly. It had to be something big, something that maybe pushed the boundaries. Was it too risky?
Yeah.
Ethically questionable? We don't know because it's redacted. But the fact they held back from even talking to the British about it, that's a huge red flag.
It definitely raises more questions than it answers.
Yeah.
What was the A case? Why did they need to work with the British on it? And what made the climate so bad that they couldn't even bring it up? It's a real mystery.
So there you have it. These newly released documents, they don't tell us exactly what the government was hiding about the JFK assassination, but they do give us some really fascinating and sometimes disturbing insights into what was happening behind the scenes. We saw that early intelligence operation in India, the frantic search for those guys after MLK was killed, who, by the way, sound a lot like Oswald. Then there's the CIA's deep involvement with those Guatemalan and Cuban exiles years before 1963. And then, of course, that mysterious A case.
Now, the question for you is, how do all these pieces fit together? Or do they? What do they tell us about the things leading up to the Kennedy assassination? Are we seeing connections here, or is it just a bunch of random intelligence stuff from the Cold War?
One thing's for sure, as more of these documents become public, we have the chance to really challenge what we thought we knew about the past. And who knows what other hidden stories are waiting to be discovered. There's always more to uncover, and we hope you keep digging, keep exploring these historical mysteries, and keep asking questions.